Before we begin this episode, there's a few things I want to get out of the way. First, I'm Josh. With me is Justice.
Hello.
You might recognize us as the hosts of Copilots Review, or Inside the Cockpit. And I want to apologize for the delay between the last episode and this, but that delay exists because Copilots Review is being retired, and we are now becoming
Talking Talk Tuah.
The companion podcast to the companion podcast to your new favorite podcast.
Exactly.
Anything you hear on Talk Tuah, you'll hear third here. Right after you hear it on Talking Talk Tuah, you'll hear it here with me and Justice on Talking Talk Tuah.
Yeah, so you'll hear it first on Talk Tuah, and you'll hear a second on Talking Talk Tuah, but you'll definitely hear it third here on Talking Talk Tuah.
So again, apologize for the delay in episodes, but we've been working on this transition to a new format, and again, another apology I need to make. We're not a video podcast, so I know we're not technically an actual podcast like Talking Talk Tuah or Talk Tuah, but we're doing our best here with no cameras, just audio, and we want to thank you for coming along on the ride with us.
Yeah.
Now, like I said, you'll know us from Copilots Review, but if you have listened to Talking Talk Tuah yet, the companion podcast to your favorite podcast, to which we are a companion to the companion of, you'll know that the guys from Talking Talk Tuah,
Cam and Peter,
are formerly the guys from Beast Pod Official.
Yeah, and for some reason you don't know Beast Pod Official, which I mean, come on.
Who doesn't know Beast Pod Official?
You might recognize Cam at least as intern from Podcast But Outside, where he is the camera guy for Podcast But Outside, the only podcast that takes place outside.
You know, I know they say that, but I don't think it's true.
Yeah, no, I know Rooster Teeth before it got
also,
weird
wasn't
bullshit.
the last episode of The Yard outside?
Yeah, but Podcast But Outside, you know which one that is, though, right? Like, yay, nay?
No, I've not heard of it.
It's the one where the people set up, like, a table, have a podcast, and they'll grab random people to join their podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of streaming. It's actually not bad. I've watched.
So it's like this podcast.
But if it was outside and involved other people,
different.
and it was completely different. Yeah, and you called it a podcast, but you were technically a vodcast.
Yes, yep.
Yeah, because podcast isn't a podcast anymore.
No, podcasts are specifically audio media formats that were made compatible with the RSS feeds, and originally with the Apple iPod software.
Yes.
And later expanded
podcast.
to just be RSS audio feeds.
Yeah, because people were like, oh, we can just do RSS feeds by themselves. We don't have to involve Apple.
Yeah, exactly. And now for some reason there's a surge of people thinking podcasts require cameras. And I don't even mean that like in a sense that a lot of podcasts now are video casts. I mean, if you go to like our podcast, the Reddit, our podcast, you'll see a bunch of people being like, what camera should I get to start my podcast? And it's
none.
You don't need cameras.
Look, man, you're making a vodcast. We actually had this term, and people used it for a while, and then they just stopped.
Now back to Talking Talk Tuah. The guys mentioned that in this first episode, Haliey makes a special plea to all of her fans, because at the heart of this, our show, their show, and Talk Tuah are all about Haliey Welch.
Yes.
But she makes a special plea to everybody not to mention the Hawk Tuah meme or the spit on that thing meme, because she's so much more than that.
Yeah.
I, however, have a solid point of disagreement. How can you use the terminology Talk Tuah, which is an obvious play on the meme of Hawk Tuah, and then try to claim distance from that when you're trying to attempt to use that to catapult yourself into fame?
No, I agree. She is so much more than that. She's also a former bed spring factory worker from Nashville, Tennessee. And
I know this is spoilers for the future, but she's also a future crypto rug pull scammer.
Yeah.
So like, and I do want to mention, you said Cam and what's the other guy's name?
Peter?
Cam and Peter. We'll go on later in this episode to make the argument that it doesn't matter if, like, she got famous for the Hawk Tuah bit. She was always going to be famous. She was on that path. Yeah. And I don't think I agree.
Yeah, look, I think, obviously, before we talk more about it, Talking Talk Tuah is ostensibly satirical.
Oh, is it?
That is the claim. Take on Talk Tuah. And I can see points of it, definitely.
Was Beast Pod Official also satirical? Or?
I believe so.
Okay.
And I definitely see points of it in this. I just don't think episode 1 of Talk Tuah has enough going for it in of itself for it to have, like, big things to be satirical about, really. But I definitely feel like the She Was Always Going to Be Famous one is meant to be part of the satire. And then some of, like, the way they approach Whitney Cummings as a person feels satirical.
Well, see, I didn't realize it was supposed to be satirical. They came off as very, very, very genuine.
I feel like the issue is so much of it was kind of flat. Like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just assumed that was them.
Yeah, no, I do too. And I think that was the issue.
Because they make a very good point that Haliey is a podcast host.
Yes.
And they don't just mean like that she's hosting a podcast, because obviously she's hosting a podcast.
Yeah.
They mean that she has like the charisma and energy to like keep up with her guests and like keep a compelling show going, which is something that they specifically lack. And they don't even have guests.
Yeah. And I can't shit on them too much. I don't know if we're much better, but
I think they had like 6,000 views on episode 1, which is like, much better than ours.
Yeah. They're also on YouTube and have video format.
And
one of them is connected to a more famous podcast, and they did something involving Mr. Beast, so of course they got views. Anyways, though, yes, ostensibly, Talking Talk Tuah is all satirical. It's kind of hard to tell with this first episode, in my opinion.
And in the first episode, again, I'm blanking on their name, Cam and
Peter.
Cam and Peter set up this dichotomy between Haliey and her guest, Whitney
Cummings,
who is
fucking amazing comedian, producer, writer, actor.
They set up this dichotomy that like the podcast is almost a conflict, a battle, a David versus Goliath-esque struggle, where Haliey Welch is our David and Whitney Cummings is the proverbial Goliath, and David slays Goliath both in the biblical story and here in this podcast episode that Talking Talk Tuah is reviewing. But I don't know if we could say that that's a fair assessment.
Yeah, I'm not so certain that we could either. Like, obviously, the fact that we've our podcast is about Talking Talk Tuah and not directly about Talk Tuah.
It would be disingenuous for us to have seen Talk Tuah and to like use that to influence our discussion about Talking Talk Tuah.
Yeah.
Because then we no longer be the companion podcast to your favorite podcast.
Yeah. You need to watch Talk Tuah, and then you need to watch Talking Talk Tuah, and then you need to listen to Talking Talk Tuah. So that's why it's companion. You need the other things. We are an additional source material. Obviously.
Also, I've been told that I need to say Poochie Binyana.
No, not like that, but more like Poochie Binyana.
Poochie Binyana.
Yeah.
I don't have the context, but I've been told that was an important thing I needed to say.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. At some point, Whitney calls herself the quote-unquote ghetto Dolly Parton, which Cameron and Peter think are both outdated and in poor taste.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could see why you might call it outdated, maybe. And that, though, calling it outdated also feels poor in taste, because then you're saying Dolly Parton's outdated just because she's old?
Well, yeah, and Dolly Parton is still, like, an incredibly important figure. She's, like, heavily involved in politics. She just got in like a giant like political issue where the state where she has her library, which may be Indiana. Like,
I don't think it's Indiana.
I think there's an Indiana learning library dedicated to the Dolly Parton funds.
There might be.
And
I think she might have more than one, though.
The state legislator was trying to like determine what books could be in that. And she was like, no, it's a private facility.
Yeah, it's a private facility. It's not run by the government in any way. You can't control what I have in my privately funded library.
And she had like a legal case with that. And like acting like Dolly Parton is no longer relevant when
it's fucking wild.
She is one of the few celebrities who is continually and actively doing stuff to fight fascism.
Yeah, which I don't know, like, I guess the argument here then that it's in poor taste is because ghetto has a negative connotation to it.
Yeah,
and you're saying ghetto Dolly Parton almost as like a knockoff Dolly Parton, which, you know what, fair, kind of in poor taste, but I mean, that's also just slang and how language is used.
Yeah, I guess, like, if you mean that calling something the ghetto version of something is outdated, 100% could agree with that.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, that interpretation of that, 100%.
But I don't think Whitney Cummings is wrong. I mean, in the description of like basically a knockoff or a less good version of Dolly Parton, I would say Whitney Cummings kind of isn't wrong about her own assessment there. She is also heavily involved in politics and things. She's just not as popular as Dolly Parton.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
And is more crass about it because she is a female comedian who is in her 40s and has been doing like serious, like crass humor for quite a while now.
Fair enough. Speaking of crass female humor, not completely unrelated to Talking Talk Tuah and thus really our show, but man, I love Taylor Tomlinson.
Yeah, Taylor Tomlinson's great.
She's so good. Anyways,
I think she's been on tours sponsored by Whitney Cummings, actually.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I might be wrong about that, but I believe that's the case.
I have notes here where Cameron specifically says that Haliey is full of Southern charm.
Yeah.
And she calls Whitney out for being a crockpot full of shit. It might be my misinterpretation. It might not be calling Whitney herself out as a crockpot full of shit, but something she said.
Yeah.
And apparently that terminology and like that Southern charm is really endearing.
But I don't know, man. That's I I guess that's assumingly part of the satire, because every time I've heard Haliey Welch say anything, it's not really any Southern charm or anything. There's a bit of a Southern twang here and there sometimes, but it's not even that much.
I think, and again...
And I don't think I've ever heard too many people who take on a more Southern dialect and phrase of speaking use crockpot full of shit as an idiom.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, I think what Cameron and Peter are saying here, and what we should be taking from this, is that Haliey has a Southern demeanor.
Yeah.
But that doesn't actually equate to Southern charm, because Southern charm is specifically a manner of talking in which you wouldn't use curses and stuff.
Yeah.
You wouldn't say somebody's full of shit. You would say, oh, you're such a bright person. Like, you would compliment them in a way that would compliment their intelligence.
Yeah.
Or say what they're saying.
Or your insult is so heavily couched in, like, weird comparison that it's unclear what you actually fucking mean. You just get the vibe that it doesn't mean anything good.
Mm-hmm. So we move on from there to talking about Pookie.
Also, just in general, more than that, when people are talking about like Southern charm,
mm-hmm.
so much of it, especially like the phrases used and some of the like even accent sounds and work are like classically old South Georgia,
mm-hmm.
not Nashville, not Appalachia South.
Tennessee is technically Southern.
I know. I'm saying
in that they were part of the Confederacy.
Yeah, and also they have like some Appalachian accent going on, which so does Southern Indiana for part of it. Like, it happens, and people will say it's a Southern accent, and they're not wrong. It is technically a type of Southern accent, though typically, if you know your accents of anything, you're normally going to attribute it to an Appalachian accent.
But technically, both of those areas are Rust Belt, Bible
mm-hmm.
Belt.
Yeah.
Less so Southern.
Yeah.
While they do share common traits between the Southern states,
idioms, metaphors, some of the tonal language,
they are distinctly different.
Yeah.
So after talking about how Haliey has Southern charm, Pete and Cam go on to discuss Pookie,
who is apparently Haliey Welch's boyfriend,
significant other. They're not dating.
Yes. And it apparently comes up in Talk Tuah when they're talking about relationships and how she doesn't want to be super public with hers.
Yeah.
Which, honestly, fair. It's the best take I've ever heard attributed to Haliey Welch. Like, yeah, no, it's fair to keep your public life, your private life from the public.
But she specifically says they're not dating because they've never been on a date, although she later recants that and says that they've been on a single date to Taco Bell. And at that point, Pete and Cam get into an argument about whether or not you can go to Taco Bell as a date, whether or not Taco Bell as a concept
is a date possibility.
And I don't remember if it was Peter or Cam, but one of them says, regardless of where you go, as long as there are gorditas, a date is possible.
I think that one was Peter.
And I don't know if I agree with him, but I will say, if you go somewhere and there are gorditas,
mm-hmm.
it is definitely a positive experience, just by default.
Fair.
And if dating requires two people to have a positive experience together, I will agree that going to Taco Bell and having gorditas qualifies as a date.
I'll agree. And from this part, we get, I honestly can't remember which one is Cam and which one is Peter. It was the person on the left side of the screen and the person on the right side of the screen. And I think the one on the left was Cam and I think the one on the right was Peter. So if that's true, Cam was of the opinion that instead of her significant other being Pookie, she should date Matt Rife.
Mm-hmm. Which
I think comes up because in Talk Tuah they are talking about her crush on Matt Rife.
Which this is really funny to me because this severely dates the episode.
Yeah.
Because Matt Rife, if you're not familiar, Matt Rife had a moment. He had a moment where everybody thought he was the bee's knees. He was the best crowd work, the best comedian. But, it turns out Matt Rife, not that great of a human being. Specifically, he's very apparently misogynist. And, that's not surprising. But, and also, he's very, superficially shallow.
I mean, so far, everything you're saying sounds like it matches up with everything I know about what Haliey Welch is about.
Yeah. But Matt Rife, had this explosion of popularity, and then he had a Netflix special. Everybody's like, oh, how did Netflix let all this misogyny?
Yeah.
And then he kind of, died off. So this is a very time capsule moment.
Yeah.
Where Matt Rife is no longer in that point of the social conscious. So this is really, dating both that episode of Talk Tuah, that episode of Talking Talk Tuah, and now this episode of Talking Talk Tuah.
Yeah.
I was guilty of liking Matt Rife. I thought some of his crowd work was very good, but
I can't remember who he is.
Oh,
I think I've probably seen some of his stuff. I don't need a reference. I don't care. But according to, I'm going to stick with who I defined as who, Cam Okay. Cam says it's more of like an LA power couple thing, whereas Peter's like, yeah, but the look in Haley's eyes when she talks about Pookie is so much better. And then they talk back and forth about that for a bit and basically come to the idea that they're going to agree to disagree.
Yes. Also, Matt Rife was very openly against the idea of he's not against, I want to be clear, he's never said anything that makes him against trans people. But he was against the idea of gender affirming surgery as being like a thing that is necessary, despite the fact that he has had gender affirming surgery in the form of plastic surgery that he has specifically said makes him feel more like a man.
Gotta love those people.
So while he's never been like specifically transphobic, he's yeah. You get it.
He's one of those people like gender affirming care is bullshit. I'm gonna get plastic surgery, so I feel like more of a man. And also, when I start to lose my hairline, I'm definitely getting plugs, which are also a form of gender affirming care.
Anyways. That brings us to the point where we get to talk about Pookie having a tattoo.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
that was
Haliey. So specifically, Whitney says that she has a thing for men with trashy tattoos.
Yeah.
Which brings
is just a really kind of a Whitney Cummings arc overall throughout her entire comedy, which is just, I have a thing. Not necessarily just for men with trashy tattoos, but I kind of just have trashy taste sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And apparently, Pookie has a trashy tattoo.
Yeah.
Because he has a quote-unquote party animal. I don't know what that means.
It's Animal from the Muppets wearing a party hat.
Oh, is that really?
No.
Oh,
but
okay.
I like it, and that's what I'm sticking with. And also, that's not a trashy tattoo. That's a great tattoo.
But it's on the inside of his thigh. And so Haliey is talking about this, and Cam and Pete seem to think that makes Whitney jealous because her boyfriend has this obviously super trashy tattoo.
Yeah.
And this is where Whitney, in Pete and Cam's eyes, comes out publicly as being a cougar. She says she says that they had similar taste in men when they were both in their 20s.
Yeah.
Whitney is no longer in her 20s, but Pete and Cam seem to interpret this to mean that she still has the same taste.
She's like 42 or 43 or something?
I think
like
so,
early
yes.
40s.
I think so. Fact-checking would be against the spirit of Talking Talk Tuah, which means it's against the spirit of Talking Talk Tuah.
Yes.
So I think she's in her 40s.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's the big point here is that Whitney Cummings is a cougar, and she publicly came out on Haliey's podcast, which is both a big moment for Haliey's podcast, but also a big challenging moment for a woman as popular and celebrated as Whitney Cummings. Additionally, Pete and Cam hypothesized that this might mean that there's a rivalry or like an enmity between Whitney and Haliey.
Yeah.
But they also then go to point out that there really can't be, because at the end of the episode, Haliey gives Whitney a friendship bracelet.
Yeah.
So,
you know what I feel like is something that should be mentioned, though?
What's that?
Because I realize we haven't talked about it, and the more I think about it, Talking Talk Tuah, they only mention it like once, really, I think. Talk Tuah is not just Haliey Welch and guest. It's Haliey Welch, her friend, and guest.
Haliey Welch, her friend, her manager, and guest. It's 4 people.
Oh, yes. And we have not talked about 2 of them because they have apparently no bearing on what matters for Talking Talk Tuah.
If we're the companion podcast to Talking Talk Tuah, then we only get what Talking Talk Tuah seems as the important aspects of Talk Tuah. And that means that this friend and manager are effectively, in the eyes of Talking Talk Tuah, adding nothing to the show.
Yes.
Which means, in the eyes of Talking Talk Tuah, they might as well not exist.
Exactly.
So, after that, Pete and Cam go on to describe how, and we mentioned this already, Haliey was going to always be a celebrity at some point, but it was because of the street interview TikTok clip that she launched to fame because of the Hawk Tuah spit on that thing meme.
Yes.
But they go into a description of how these type of street interviews are predatory and exploitative.
Yeah.
And I can agree with the first part.
Oh, yeah.
Street interviews, especially outside of like bars and like areas like that, are specifically exploitative. Oh, yeah. And specifically predatory.
They also are almost always targeting young women.
Well, yeah.
A lot of them target young women.
And if you get into the content, it's roughly, they just target people that look drunk.
Fair.
And try to get them to say things that would get you canceled, which...
I think it's probably just because like everyone that I've seen has been by a dude bro, and dude bros are also skeevy as fuck. So
I've seen dude bros approach dude bros, but I've also seen women doing these shows. It doesn't matter. The point is, it's exploitative and predatory, and both of those things that Pete and Cam say are 100% true.
Yes.
It is just incredibly odd to me coming from people who are self-described Mr. Beast superfans.
Though according to them, they did stop the Mr. Beast official pod when they learned too much about Jimmy.
Mr. Beast superfans.
Yeah. Though they do say they don't have anything against him, especially because, he might be a future guest in Talk Tuah. Who knows? But apparently Haliey Welch pops up in a Lunchly ad, and her podcast is handled by Logan Paul's media company.
I have notes of this somewhere. Yeah, okay, so it's closer to the end. But apparently Haliey Welch's podcast has created a relationship of some sort between Haliey Welch, KSI, and the Paul brothers. Which,
KSI and the Paul brothers already had a relationship. I think it's just that Haley's now involved in all that.
I'm saying Haliey and those three individuals.
Yes.
And if I had to maybe pick the four horsemen of the apocalypse,
it'd be Jake Paul, Logan Paul, KSI, and Mr. Beast.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Like,
that would be the four horsemen of the Gen Z apocalypse. I have to clarify that, though, because sitting just above them is, like, Andrew Tate.
Yeah, Andrew Tate's just actively evil, though.
Yeah.
I don't think the horsemen of the apocalypse are necessarily actively evil, so much as they are destructive and damaging for all of humanity.
Fair enough.
And Andrew Tate is both of those things as well. Let's not overlook the fact that he is one of the primary points in the pipeline from whatever to incels.
Yeah. He is the major turning point in the red pill incel fucking pipeline.
Yeah. We also learned in this episode of Talking Talk Tuah that Haliey was drunk on vodka during the street interview. But we also learned that in general, vodka is her favorite alcohol, and she doesn't really deal with collared alcohols. She doesn't like those collared ones.
Oof.
And I'm phrasing that badly on purpose.
Yeah.
Not Peter Cam.
No.
I don't want to give them credit for my bad jokes. But specifically, she can't do cinnamon whiskey because it turns her into a different person. Her alter ego, the evil Haliey Welch. Yeah. I don't know anything about Haliey.
That's what she claims.
Yeah. But also those colored alcohols. Am I right?
No.
Look, I get it. Vodka's not my favorite alcohol. I like tequila personally.
Vodka's one of my favorite alcohols.
But tequila comes in both Blanco and Gold.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have to deal with the colored alcohols if I don't want to.
Sure. But from here, they kind of start wrapping up. There's not a lot more, really.
Yeah, they say Talk Tuah is the next big thing, which, I mean, obviously that's why they're doing Talking Talk Tuah. They're trying to ride the coattails of a much larger, more successful thing.
Yep.
And I don't want to, speak out of turn, but obviously...
we're doing the same thing.
That's what Talking Talk Tuah is.
Yeah.
We're here to ride the coattails of Talking Talk Tuah, who are riding the coattails of Talk Tuah. So...
look, we understand our place, and we obviously aren't capable enough to, ride the coattails of something as big as Talk Tuah. But we figured we could get our own little bit in there,
Indeed. They also talk about how Haliey is specifically a very intelligent individual because she didn't immediately capitalize on the Hawk Tuah memology and instead took her time to build this thing up.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that makes her smart. I think, and maybe it has led to a longer lasting relevance for her and did build up to a point where she could create a crypto rug pull. So maybe they're right.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. But I feel like if you have a flash pan of fame, you should immediately be attempting to capitalize on that as hard as you can.
Oh, yeah. I mean...
if fame is your goal.
Yeah. From my understanding, nothing here is supported with information from Talking Talk Tuah. Haliey saw other people making money off of the meme and was like, oh, fuck, I should do that. And then did that. But it took her seeing a bunch of other people do that to realize, oh, wait, that's how memes work.
No, earlier, Cam and Pete kind of set up this false dichotomy of a battle between Whitney and Haliey. And it does sound like the end of the first episode of Talk Tuah does have a little bit of actual conflict between them. Yeah. Because Whitney accuses Haliey of code switching for the benefit of social media impression. Yeah. Saying that she is not actually this sweet Southern charmer. Yeah. And that she's only doing this to facilitate social media impression.
Particularly in the way she tries to close out the episode. She tries to apparently switch up to a more Southern accent and charmingly, I suppose, wrap up this would be basically almost as an idea establishing that it's because of Whitney that the episode is now ending, not in a negative term, but oh, Whitney has to go, and Whitney's just no, this is just you saying, hey, get the fuck out. And I'm done, I've hit what I need for my time, get the fuck out now.
Totally valid, and I think probably true. People in general code switch.
Oh yeah.
I am not the same person on this microphone that I am off of it.
I'm pretty much the same.
You even talk different on the mic.
I said pretty much.
Yeah.
I have to change some of my things because I talk too fast, nor in real life most of the time, and I have to be more sure to enunciate things.
Yes. So I don't disagree that Haliey is probably code switching for the benefit of the audience.
I also say pog a whole lot less on the podcast, and noise.
Me too.
My brain's been ruined by Twitch.
My immediate reaction to so many things in life is just pog, and then I'm like, yeah.
I've said pog too much recently. Noise.
And I say it to people who have no idea what pog is. I've said it to people whose like only relation to pog is like those things from the 90s.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, code switching completely, definitely a thing. And I don't know if Whitney is fair in calling her out here for it, because I think Whitney probably even code switches. Like, Whitney is not the same person on stage as she is.
No, no comedian.
Yeah.
No good comedian, at the very least, is going to be the same person on stage as they are off.
Yeah. If anything,
that's true for any performer.
If anything, really. I imagine it's like wrestling, where like the character, the person on stage, is the real person, but like dialed up to 11.
Yeah.
Like, I assume it's like wrestling in that regard.
No, it's like Spinal Tap, because they're dialed up to 11.
Fair enough. We also learn here in the closing moments of Talking Talk Tuah that Haliey Welch has a dog foundation, Paws Across America.
Yeah.
Which is the first I've heard of this. I didn't know Haliey Welch actually did beneficial things.
Neither did I.
But obviously that's very interesting to me.
Yeah.
The idea that she's actually using her celebrity to do good work with animals, despite her really shitty political takes and
crypto ripples.
Like, despite the shitty things, she is still doing a good thing. So I think even people who are highly critical of Haliey Welch and Talk Tuah could probably appreciate the fact that she is doing her best to help dogs and animals.
Yeah.
This is also where we get mentioned that Haliey Welch now has ties to KSI and the Paul brothers.
Yeah.
Talking Talk Tuah claims to be impartial in this factor, but I will tell you this. Talking Talk Tuah. I will tell you this. Talking Talk Tuah is not impartial on this. KSI is a piece of shit. Logan Paul's a piece of shit. Jake Paul's a piece of shit. They're all pieces of shit. And I know just because you know somebody, that doesn't mean that you are in their circle.
Yeah.
The more you are associated with the Pauls and KSI, the more I'm going to assume that you are a piece of shit.
And it's not helpful that your podcast is produced by Paul Brothers Media.
100%. Now, Pete and Cam in Talking Talk Tuah by inviting Haliey Welch to come and be on their show.
Yes.
And in turn, I would like to, in this episode of Talking Talk Tuah, by inviting Pete and Cameron to come on to our next episode of Talking Talk Tuah.
Yep.
You know, just to like complete the circle.
As it must be done.
I don't think Haliey ever appears on Talking Talk Tuah, but that doesn't mean that Pete and Cam can't come and appear on Talking Talk Tuah.
Exactly.
But I think that's the end of that episode, which means that's the end
of this episode.
And I know...
Well, actually, I guess that's the end of that episode, which means it's the end of that episode, which means it's the end of this episode.
And I know everybody who's come to us knowing our previous content is expecting that second episode. But Copilots review is dead and gone. Yep. This is Talking Talk Tuah.
You just get the one.
And you just get the one. We're going to slowly catch up with Talking Talk Tuah, and then we will do our best to keep up with them per episode live.
Exactly.
So I guess we can still end in a similar way. Justice, do you have any like closing thoughts on Talking Talk Tuah?
I like their bay windows.
They did have nice bay windows. I think that's the best part of a video podcast is sometimes like the studio, in this case, a living room. Very nice.
I got distracted sometimes though by people walking by outside. Yeah. You?
I couldn't understand, like I didn't sense the insincerity, the satire from them, and because of that, I had a much more negative take on this.
Fair.
Initially, but if it is satire, good for them.
Agreed.
All right, so that's going to bring us to the close of the episode. First, obviously, happy April Fool's Day. This is going up a couple days late. We're not doing more Talking Talk Tuah.
God, no.
We struggled to do an episode of Talking Talk Tuah. The show is boring. And I think that's because the thing it's satirizing
is boring. But
hey, what are you going to do? We do apologize for missing our last episode. So on the 12th, we're going to be attempting to release both an Inside the Cockpit and the final YouTube sci-fi episode review of the show Origin.
Yes. New work schedules make podcast schedule weird and fucked up.
We're adapting to new work schedules and the new shared free time that those work schedules allow.
Yeah. It's just readjusting time management and scheduling.
But that means we'll see you on the 12th with a new Inside the Cockpit and potentially a new Copilots review. The show is not dead. We're not done. You can't kill us that easily. But if
we've been doing this for too long for no value.
the sunk cost fallacy is fully in effect. But if you want to contact us and tell us what your opinion on Talking Talk Tuah is, or what your opinion of Talking Talk Tuah is,
or what your opinion of Talk Tuah is,
you could do that a myriad of ways. copilotsreview@gmail.com is your best and most effective way to communicate with us.
You can find us on Blue Sky at Copilots Review.
You could find us on the Elon Musk hellscape that is Twitter at Copilots Review, although we don't use that anymore and we don't check it. So while you can find us there because we haven't deleted our account, you will not get engagement from us.
Or you can find a link to all of those except for the last one by going to copilotsreview.simplecast.com, where we have links to our email, our Blue Sky, our Discord, our Patreon, and our YouTube.
And until next time, I guess we didn't fly with us this time. So I guess until next time, spit on that thing.
Ba-da-ba-ba-da-da.